The hijab has been worn and practiced for centuries. Even before Islam, the women of the Abrahamic line would cover themselves with a veil and would act with respect and honour. In the 20th century, the media platform grew vigorously and was very accessible to people of all ages. Many Muslim girls began using this platform to talk about their religion and beliefs and try to make wearing the hijab in the West easier and more fashionable. However, the way the hijab was worn did not accommodate to the Islamic Sharia. Hijab became more of a fashion symbol, and the word modesty was used to define all actions. For young girls watching these YouTube influencers, they have a desire to be like them and to dress in a more fashionable way. In some cases, they would also feel pressured to look a certain way, to fit in and be more accepted. The spiritual aspect of hijab is usually neglected. Many tend to focus on the physical hijab with the belief that the covering of the hair is enough. However, one's akhlaq, interaction with the opposite gender and the way they carry themselves amongst people is also vital. I met up with Sister Ma'sooma Ja'far to look at the spiritual hijab in further depth, to discuss ways in which we can empower the young people with hijab. So we want to talk about hijab and the areas surrounding hijab and modesty, and how young girls and boys are affected in this society we live in today. Firstly, could you just briefly explain what hijab is in Islam, for example? Is it a spiritual or a physical concept?
I think it's a bit of both, because obviously you've got the physical covering, which everyone identifies with as the hijab, so it's the head covering. I mean, I think most people, when they think of hijab, they think of a head covering. It's a lot more than that. Obviously, it's the full covering of the body for a woman, with her hair being covered as well. But there's hijab of the eyes, which is referred to first and foremost in the Holy Quran, and it's addressed to the men before it's addressed to the women. Where they're being told to cast down their gaze and to cover their private parts, and then the women are told to do exactly the same in the next verse in Surah Nur, and then the Holy Quran goes into sort of the physical covering of the woman. But there's a whole spiritual aspect of the hijab as well, and the social aspect as well. So there's lots of different parts to the hijab. I think we get so caught up on the headscarf that we forget everything else. Yeah. And I think that's quite dangerous, because then you're not even fulfilling the physical hijab, let alone the spiritual hijab, the social hijab. You know, all of those sort of go out of the window. Yeah,
and would you say that it's key for young girls and boys to first have the spiritual aspect of hijab before they are to achieve successfully the physical aspect?
For sure, I think with any ruling, we need to realise that it's coming from the spiritual perspective first and foremost. Any ruling that is in Islam is not to do with the body; it's to do with the soul, because we know how to take care of our bodies. We're living in a physical world, so we know how to take care of our physical body. You know, we know when we're hungry, we know when we're thirsty, when we're tired, when we're hurting. You know, if the body is ill, we know that. Yeah. So God doesn't tell you to make sure you're eating your 5 a day or drink 2 liters of water or whatever, 8 hours of sleep or whatever it is at the moment. But He does tell us how to take care of our soul, because we don't know how to. And we're not even aware of the soul, because we're living in the physical realm. Yet it's the soul that is who we are, and it's the soul that will continue the journey when we die. We will leave behind the physical body, which we've taken so long taking care of, and we'll be given another body. But it's the soul that is who I am that will continue. And out of His love and mercy, Allah tells me how to take care of myself, how to take care of my soul. So when He tells me something is wajib, the purpose behind that wajibat is to ensure that the soul is taken care of. And when He tells me something is haram, it is because it's absolutely detrimental to the soul. And that's why he tells me, don't do this. It's going to damage you in ways that you won't even understand. But trust me, don't do this.
Yeah.
But because we only look at it from the physical perspective, we sort of think, no, you know, how's that going to hurt me? It's fine. It's, you know, and we bring everything back into the physical realm. And yes, some of the wajibat does benefit the physical body, but that's not the purpose. The purpose is for the soul. And if we understand that, then we will look into all the rulings in a much more deeper sense, rather than trying to sort of understand it only from the physical perspective.
Sister Sarah Bukhari is a graduate of international relations. I paid her a visit to further my understanding of this topic. So can you briefly explain the history of the interaction of Islam within the West?
So we have two different elements that it's important to critically analyse when we're discussing this concept of hijab, because there's a long history of this interaction with the West, and sometimes as Muslim believers who are new to integrating in a Western society as diaspora communities, it's very easy for us to focus on the turn of the 21st century and the events of post 9/11 as a central point of our identity and the response that hijab has had in the public sphere as a result. But the history of hijab and indeed Islam and the West in general, a meeting of the East and West, which some people call as clash of civilizations, is really important to analyse and result in terms of how it impacts our identity today. So in the 18th century, what you find in European history, and Dr. Hussein Nasser has a briefing and he denotes the exact the element of this history of the Enlightenment era being a time of a revolution in the ideas and the conceptual theories which define European society. And in that time what you find is philosophies emerge where there's an interaction between science, rationality and the issue of faith in the public sphere. So the issue is that the religions of European history and societies had been at war with one another. It's caused much conflict in the history of European society. And as a result, there's this huge question as to where does religion really fit in the public sphere. And then you find in the 19th, 20th century, the history of colonialism intensifies. And in 1907, it's the first track record of Christian missionaries, they say. Yvonne Haddad is a strong philosopher and theorist in this regard, in regards to the history of Islam and Christianity. And she says that in a journal she writes in 2008 that 1907 is the first interaction Christian missionaries had with the Islamic Orientalist other as a woman. And these women obviously quite publicly adorned the hijab as a statement of faith. This was an antithesis to everything that Europe was trying to project at that time. And therefore the issue of the hijab became very much a talk of discussion in the Western world. It became something which was denoted as completely opposite to what the progressive female should look like. It became a symbol of backwardness and oppression. It became spoken about in such a sense that there was an element of sympathy in trying to understand why these women had such a subjugated role within Eastern societies. And therefore the symbol of the hijab became this pinnacle of the differentiation between Western and Eastern society. And from that point onwards, really, it became a huge amount of discussion in regards to how these two societies would merge.
When we think about the physical aspect of hijab, most of the time it's the females that are affected. So when they go to college or university, the peer pressure, the social groups can really affect how they decide to wear their hijab. And a lot of the attention is kind of removed away from the boys or the men, because with them you can't physically see their hijab. How can we get girls to embrace hijab and love it truly for what it means, instead of it just being just the physical aspect, but actually loving it and having the desire to embrace it and to do it correctly?
Okay, so there's lots of different things here, I think, that if I can just break it down.
Yes.
One, I think if a boy is fulfilling the hijab, it will be noticed, even in the physical realm.
Okay.
Because he will behave in a different way than boys who are not fulfilling the hijab. So the way he interacts socially with girls, the way he looks at them out of respect when he's talking to them and not out of lust and desire, all of those will be picked up. So even although you said that it won't be noticed, it should be noticed. And if it's not being noticed in the boys, then that means that hijab is not being, they're not behaving in a hijabi perspective. And I think that's really important to realise that. So they should look different to non-Muslim boys.
Okay.
In the way that they behave. So the social hijab should come across straight away, whether you're a boy or a girl. Obviously for a girl, the physical attire, the dressing that she wears is much more profound, you know, it stands out much more. And I think that's makes people feel like they can't fit in. And I think the problem is that we shouldn't feel the need to fit in. We should have the confidence in our own selves and our own identity and the understanding of the hijab, so that I don't compromise my values and my soul and the detriment to myself in order to please people who, after I leave university, I will probably not even see or hear from.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot to do with confidence, and I think we don't understand how to teach confidence to our children. As mothers, as parents, we think if we put them out there in the public eye, if we get them to do speeches, if we get them to do this, you know, that they'll become confident. Confidence is from within. Confidence is knowing who you are. Confidence is when you have your relationship with God, and when you know that you have God behind you, you don't need anyone else, and you don't feel worried or scared about anything.
Living in the West and holding on to religion is a constant battle. With enough confidence, the religion would no longer be compromised. Confidence allows any individual the ability to carry themselves and to dress in accordance to Islam without having to worry about peer pressure and the expectations of social media and society. So as young girls that live in the West, I wanted to get your views and opinions on how you integrate into society and how hijab affects you or doesn't affect you. Can you tell me a little bit about how you deal with, you know, your day-to-day life with hijab, and if there are any struggles or challenges that you may or may not have?
Okay, so me personally, every day, I'm not an everyday home person. I'm always out to college, work, or shopping as well. So me leaving the house wearing the hijab is something I've chose to do myself. No one has forced me to do it, but in the society and nowadays, what you hear in the news, how hijabs get dragged and everything, it doesn't stop me from wanting to wear it, but it scares me.
Okay.
Like walking around on the roads and everything, like it just to an extent, like you start getting paranoid. Someone's going to come to you or anything. But overall, as a person, I just love wearing a hijab.
Okay, and you are at college, and how do you feel when you go into college wearing hijab and observing hijab in the way that you do?
So at my college, there's a lot of hijabis around, so it doesn't make me feel like very isolated or not like different. But as a Western country, everyone's going to look at you, or they're going to start questioning, what is that on your head, or they start wanting to know everything. But as a whole community, they know like Muslims are a very big population in the UK, so it's not as bad as what people would picture it outside the Western countries.
Okay, and do you feel like it kind of restricts you from anything or limits you to do anything, wearing your hijab?
No, not really. It's just, we've always, personally, I've had it since 9 years old, so it's always been part of my life. I've managed to at the beginning when you're first wearing it, it can feel a bit unusual, but as you get along, it becomes part of your life, so it just becomes who you are. Yeah.
How do you feel about integrating into university? There are, now so many social media influences and different ways of wearing hijab. Do you feel in any way that kind of not pressures you into it, but kind of makes you not feel the same way about hijab that you maybe did before?
You would feel a bit uncomfortable because you'd see like everyone wearing a specific style of hijab, and then you might wear a bit longer or a bit looser, and you might not feel as comfortable, but then you can I think it just really depends on you as a person, like how much confidence you have to wear what you wear.
Yeah, no, I know. And do you feel like you're isolated at times? Because, you know, at university and college now, there are many different ways or forms that young girls choose to wear their hijab. Do you feel segregated from certain, you know, Muslim groups or girls at college and university?
I personally feel like I see it as my identity, so I don't really feel like it affects me as much when I see other people wearing it differently. Like I've just learned it as each person has their different way of, in each culture has a different way of wearing the hijab and perceiving it. So my way is just my way. And I'm happy the way I do it. So I don't feel like it would affect me, even though like my uni is not really in a place where there's a lot of hijabis. Like it's more English.
Right.
So it's but still like it doesn't really affect me as much how I see my hijab and how I wear it. Like I would just still go along and try to like
Do your own thing.
yeah, make them understand that this is just how I am.
Right, okay. What would you say to other young girls that kind of finding it difficult to maintain it and like
Use
feel...
the Ahlul Bayt, Father as the guide, because that's how you would use it for yourself. So you would use it for other people as well to teach about hijab.
That's a good point that you mentioned. So do you think like influencers and role models are something that have a big like impact on young girls, like with social media, internet, bloggers, the hijabi fashion? How much do you think that affects people within like your uni, your college, or even yourselves at all?
It has a major effect, I think, because that's the kind of hijab that's shown on social media. So you want to wear that to fit in. You want to act a certain way or do certain things just so you can fit in with other people, just so you can be a part of that weird like community thing. But really I feel like you're just stuck in your own bubble when you're like that, because you're constantly trying to fit in with someone.
Is there anything else like within the communities that helps younger women to kind of maintain their hijabs and to be part of a community? Is there anything like I know they have, is it jalasa groups?
Jalasa groups,
With-
or like Quran lessons or
Okay.
Hawza lessons, where you bring all this Iraqi community or just Muslims, Shias in general, just all together about Quran, about hijab, about the tafsir of the Quran and
Okay.
everything. So it's such a great way to bring everyone together and explain what we're trying
And
to
it's
say.
communication. Like you listen to their views and you express your view as well. So it brings you more of a freedom of communication as well.
Okay.
You get the idea across correctly, and yeah.
It's mostly for yourself as well, to be honest. Like when I go to these jalasat, it's mostly for myself. So I remember who I am. I remember through this whole, you know, we have a crazy life. You go uni, some go work and stuff. So you're not always like within religion, in the midst of religion. So when you have these kind of things, or like religious events, you have programs, you have these jalasat, it's a good reminder for yourself. Like, okay, this is who I am. This is what I believe. This is what I should, like, this is how I should carry myself on a daily basis.
How do you feel when you go into environments where you're surrounded by constant, you know, haram things, and being a Muslim and observing and salah and all of this? How do you feel when it comes to that time?
Me personally, it doesn't stop me. I would look at them and I'll feel sorry for them.
Okay.
And then I'll feel like what I'm doing is right, but they start questioning me. It's exam time on like how what you're doing is basically haram. You're forcing yourself. I'm like, I'm not really forcing myself. I feel good. Like Allah's gonna help me through the exam because I'm fasting.
Okay.
They'll look at it as a different way. Like you should give yourself energy and have food in the morning, and then come do the exam because you're gonna fail. Or they'll just start throwing all these negative stuff.
Okay.
Well, there is a lot of pressure there.
Yeah.
I personally think there's a lot of pressure. Like, to be living in the West, yes, hijab is accepted, but what type of hijab would you say is accepted? The hijab, like I don't always wear a chador, for example, but you'd wear a abaya, you would get judged. You'd wear something long, you would get judged. It is difficult. There is a lot of pressure, and you would understand why there are a lot of girls taking off their hijab.
Yeah.
But it just comes back to yourself and how you would, sometimes maybe your hijab would be perfect, right? And your hijab would be strong, but you would be lacking in other things because of all the pressures that you're going through. Some girls would come home and even though they're wearing the hijab, they're like, oh, I just want to take it off once because I'm so fed up of wearing this, and I'm so fed up, it's so hot, it's so, there's so many things that would stop you.
Yeah.
Or people would look at you in the streets or stuff. It's not as common now as it might have been years back, but it's still difficult because you don't want to feel like you're standing out. And naturally, when you'd walk in the street wearing a hijab, even if no one's looking at you, you'd feel like the whole world is looking at you.
Yeah. Some may say that the Western society is accepting the hijab. Big brands are using women wearing the hijab in their commercials or releasing sport hijabs. However, is the Western hijab or the Islamic hijab being accepted? Does social media pressure females and men to dress and act in a certain way? I sent my colleague Said Mohsin Shah to further investigate and discuss the connection between hijab and social media with Said Abdullah Al-Naqib.
When we look at social media, you know, well, it wasn't around in my time in the 90s, and then suddenly there was this big boom of people using the internet to interact with one another over long distances and to discuss current affairs, news, even their personal lives. I mean, how beneficial and how dangerous can social media be, especially for us as a Muslim community?
Well, if we're talking about social media, we do understand, and everyone knows there's positives and then there's negatives. But when you put into the scale idea of the Islamic circle, let's say, then there's a danger if the people that is behind the screen or behind the keyboard or behind the phone doesn't know how to go about in their morality and indeed the hijab, which we'll be discussing inshallah. So I think because it's a newer thing, you'll find it's not discussed as much, because the people that are using it, they don't want to hear a Maulana come and say, well, this is how you use Facebook, or this is how you use Instagram, or this is how you use emails, etc., or Snapchat, because they're like, well, what does the Maulana know about what I go through? Or what does the Maulana know about using Facebook? What does the Maulana know about using Instagram or Snapchat? But you'll find when Islam comes to us, the etiquette is always there. When Islam tells us this is how you should preserve your hijab, this is how your morality should be, this is how you should portray yourself being a messenger for this religion. It doesn't matter whether you're behind the screen or you're face to face with a person. It should be the same exact way that you carry yourself. The way that you'd speak to a person of the same or the opposite gender when you're meeting with them should be the exact same, keeping that in mind when you talk to them online, obviously. So I think, just to answer that, what do you think? Yes, there is a huge danger. It's like a knife. You could easily use it to cut an orange, or you can kill a person.
Now, talking about the current situation with young girls and how they're observing their hijab and the struggles that some may face. Now, would you say social media has a part in that? Bloggers, YouTubers, do they influence the youth with their hijab?
I think it's an extraordinary development we've had, again, since the Enlightenment, post-Enlightenment era, that technological advancement has reached such a point where we're experiencing things as human beings, even from a non-spiritual religious perspective, which is really bizarre to the makeup and of a human being in general. So what you're finding is this abundance of this culture, which is very much portraying images of a perfection, of a life which is perfect, of ideals which are perfect. But if you speak to anybody in this world and you go out into the street, you'll realize that everybody has a story, and no such existence of perfection actually occurs in anybody's life. So it's a war of ideas always. The technological information age is a war of ideas. And within that war, a lot of identities are confused, often alternated and changed, and often transitioning as a result of the impacts of this technological era. So I think with social media, especially with the war on terror being something which was so publicized in the public sphere, as a Muslim, you're growing up hearing things about your religion, which automatically will make someone feel like, what is my position within this society? Do I really belong here? What stance can I make to give my religion a good impression? And I think the emergence of beauty bloggers, this modest fashion movement, originally arose from such an intention to put Islam and hijab on the map in a way that is positive to the societies that are watching and interacting with it. And I think the tragic thing is that this trajectory of displaying Islam and the hijab and our appearance in such a purely material way has almost taken from the spiritual benefits of this idea of modesty.
Yeah, and I mean, how does the kind of the Western feminism all tie into this and the perceived rights of women?
In Islam, we believe in the equality of souls. We believe that there's a purity to the souls, that every human being has a genderless soul. It's this idea that we are equal in all regards in front of the eyes of the Lord. There's not this idea from God himself that women are lesser than men, or from the Prophet even, that women were ever lesser than men. But in a physical way, we have varying responsibilities which come with the gender roles that are within this material realm that we live in. So Islam's idea of transience is this idea that we live in a dualistic existence where we are souls with bodies rather than bodies with souls. And unfortunately, as it may, scholars have, understood this issue for quite some time, that there's this huge niche between merging these two identities, and especially in a world which has become increasingly materialistic and increasingly focused on the material elements of what it means to be present in society.
Sayyid, let's look at the positive sides of social media. I mean, high street brands, internationally recognized companies have started to incorporate like hijab models. You've got a sports brand, producing famous sports brands producing like sports hijabs. So, can social media be a platform to actually promote hijab and good etiquette?
So you could, it's two-sided again. So for example, if you're portraying it in the right manner, then it's perfect. But if it's portrayed in the wrong manner and people get on board, that becomes problematic, because therefore you get a lot of people going to let's say a famous brand or a famous personality, and the way they portray hijab, if it's intertwined with what hijab is, or within the boundaries which is hijab, or acceptable hijab, then it's a huge positive, because you find all these girls that want to go towards wearing the hijab. All of a sudden they have a platform saying, well, wow, this famous brand, let's say, has now introduced the hijab, and it's been worn in such a way, you know what, I might want to do that. That looks like something I would be willing to do. And then you have, on the flip side, many influencers that, got famous, by becoming a hijabi that, does many things. And there's many of them. And all of a sudden you'll find yourself, they follow them, they might not first necessarily have the right hijab, but because they're at a platform where they have huge following, all of a sudden this, let's say, girl that's just put on the hijab, that has all these pressures around them, suddenly look up to these people, because everyone else is looking up to them. How are they wearing the hijab? My parents are telling me to wear the hijab in such a manner, and it could be a problem at home where I haven't, as a parent, taught my child what the hijab means. Therefore, I'll be easily influenced by the public, by the people in social media, seeing what they would like, what they're commenting on, what their thoughts are, because you can read the comments, you can look at the reviews, you can look at the comments that are being said, the influencer themselves, what they think of the hijab, and it goes more towards a personal preference rather than what a religious aspect of it. So personal preference would say, well, I like wearing it in such a manner. That manner could not be Islamic. That manner could be not hijab at all. However, it's their interpretation. That's where the danger comes, because as a young girl trying to understand what hijab is, not having any understanding previously, therefore these guys are going to be my role models. Now the danger with that is, let's say one day this lady takes the hijab off, or begins to slowly deteriorate her hijab. This girl has followed her all her life, and she's looked up to this person her whole life. All of a sudden she's like, yeah, well, she's taking it off, or she's wearing it like this, gives me complete legitimacy to wear it like her, because she's a role model.
Sayyid, like we were talking about social media and these people who we call influencers. Yep. Is it our fault that we follow them and we are influenced by them, or can you not blame someone to look up to these so-called role models? And what, as a community, what do you think we should be doing?
No, I don't think you say boycott them. No, because obviously you're following a person for a reason. Yeah. I mean, Imam Ali has a very interesting statement where he says, find wisdom in the tongue, even if the tongue never falls. You can find wisdom. So there might be aspects of a person that are beneficial. This person that's an influencer, I may be following them for, let's say, as an example, for males, let's say, clothing. Or it could be, could be anything. But the danger is if I'm influenced for something other than that which is beneficial to me. So if I'm following an influencer, let's say she's a female, and I'm following her for, let's say, her social, psychology, let's say, or for example, how to raise kids, or a cooking show. Could be anything. Health and nutrition, or making breakfast. The idea is I'm following because I want to gain something, which is absolutely fine. But Islam tells you should increase your knowledge, try to learn as much as you can. That's a positive. The negative becomes when I'm influenced other than that which is beneficial to me. So when I'm influenced with how she carries herself, or let's say if a person that I'm following, it's an influencer, has a foul mouth. If I'm influenced by that, it becomes a danger.
Now, would you find that the rise of Muslim female feminists has been part of this kind of area where men have got away with so many things because they're able to get away with it, whereas women are the flag bearers of Islam, and when they walk out with their hijab, they are automatically recognized as being a Muslim. Do you think that with this growing rise of Muslim feminists, that this has impacted them in that way, where they feel it's not fair, they're being kind of pressurized a lot more than men?
There's definitely a huge question of patriarchal society in Islam, and how that's impacted the progression of a female and her role within the society. And you find that a lot of Muslim feminist scholars who have written abundant works, and some of the biggest critiques against Islam have come from people who claim to be Muslims themselves, and who claim that the religion of Islam has been dominated by this, misogynist narrative which belittles the role of the woman, whereas Islam itself didn't come to do that. Now, as communities, I think it's the individual's responsibility within families, within communities, to really question, is that the case? And if it is the case, what are we doing about it? But as for, in terms of feminists who've reacted to that, I think if you look at some of the works of these Muslim feminist scholars that I speak about, they will specify that actually Islam itself, the Prophet, peace upon him himself, when he makes stances such as getting up from his seat whenever Fatima Zahra walks in the room, he's making a point that, just 20 years ago you were burying your daughters alive. And now I'm telling you that my daughter's status in this room is one which should be honoured by the men and women alike. And when he's raised that on the day of Mubahala, for example, he comes out and he says, the Prophet comes out, our women, your women. He brings Fatima Zahra as such a statement to say that faith is in the hands of this woman. Sayyidah Khadija shouldered the responsibility of prophethood with Imam Ali alayhi salam. Sayyidah Zainab carried on the torch of the prophecy through her stance after Karbala, where she took such an active role as a medium at that time to propagate the views of what it means to speak up in times of tyranny. So I think when you look at the history of Islam, there's definitely not a question of what the role of a woman is. When the Prophet, peace be upon him, married Sayyidah Khadija, there's definitely not a question that some people say she's older, some people say she's definitely the most, wealthiest businesswoman in the whole of Arabia at that time. So he's marrying an empress who has the individual autonomy and rights within her own capacity. And he, as a man, is not feeling undermined by her position. He's not, feeling insecure that this is a woman who has, traits which are to be commended within the development of Islam, her role pivotal. So I think as societies, it's important to always go back to the origins of faith.
Do you think we can use the same techniques to help with the other side of hijab, which is more to do with the psychological and the verbal? I mean, we've been talking a lot about the physical side of hijab, but what about, for example, people on Twitter? Maybe they might not even show their faces and stuff, but what they're saying is absolutely appalling or disgusting. What is it? Is it our youth have suppressed ideas and they're just trying to rebel and get out, what they want to say? Or do we think that it is more of they're just trying to get trendy, they're just looking for, instant fame or, popularity, that they have to go down this route where, their mannerisms and their verbal hijab, you could say, is absolutely appalling?
Yeah, look, you can't say that doesn't exist to a large extent. It does, because at the end of the day, I think what drives us is popularity nowadays. And if you were to write something like a hadith, let's say, you will get, I don't know how Twitter works, but retweets?
Yeah, you get.
So let's say Twitter, you'll get like retweeted. You might write a hadith, no one retweets it.
Yeah.
And then you write something that is borderline like bad.
Yeah.
And you get like 100 retweets. And you think to yourself, well, you know what? This is working for me. And you just keep on that road. Why? Because now you're getting feedback. Now you're getting people that review you. These are people that, and some people, they don't even care if they review them. They could say something bad and they get real like hate.
Yeah.
But that puts their name out there. And they're like, you know what, it doesn't matter as long as people are talking about me.
Yeah.
And so that's what the danger is. That you don't see the value of who you are.
You know, is it necessary for women to cover their hair, considering that it's not even seen as attractive or as, you know?
So you might say that for yourself, but other people might find it very attractive. You find at the start of, let's say, history, you know, as people progressed, you'll find clothing became more predominant. And within religion, which is because now you're comparing secular societies to what Allah has bestowed. Now when you look at religion, knowing that Allah created us and He knows us better than anyone else, within religion you find the people that are closer towards Allah are portrayed to be those that cover their hair. In Christianity, Judaism, you'll find now, or anywhere you go with the picture of Bibi Maryam, you can't see a picture with her without a veil. And nowadays, it's an aspect, until now, it's an aspect of beauty. The way that a girl would do her hair, the colors. That's the thing we need to realize. That the hijab just takes all that down the drain. When it says, you know what? You leave your face, you and your hands. And it'll cover everything else and preserve it for your partner. I don't have any more pressures. I can focus on that which is important rather what people think of me. I want to focus on what Allah thinks of me.
Now I know within different cultures, different types of hijab are observed. That also kind of plays a part in how people choose to wear their hijab. And also going back to kind of predating Islam, hijab's meaning was very different. I mean, I read an article where hijab, or the veil they would call, would be worn by the wealthier, and those that were poorer would be, you know, hardly covered or in a veil. And also not forgetting Christianity, Judaism, they also have hijab and modesty as part of their beliefs and their religions. So it's fascinating to see how it was and how it's become. And I feel like things are kind of going backwards instead of forwards in terms of hijab. What's your thoughts on how hijab has kind of moved through history from, you know, it being worn by those who are wealthier to now kind of less of it being worn by practicing Muslims?
El-Gindi is a scholar who in 1999 does a study on the hijab, and he says that there's over 100 different types of ways in which people can wear the hijab, and that's just what's recorded. That's the research samples are suggesting, over 100 different ways. And I think that the term itself has become so synonymous with this, especially in the public sphere, with this political rhetoric regarding the burqa within societies, within a very extreme form of religion, with communities who are isolated. And the truth is, like you said, it exists beyond all these cultural, political constrictions, and it exists in a realm which is far greater than that. Though time and culture greatly impacts hijab, I think Islam has accommodated for that, at least in terms of how the hijab is spoken about in the Quran. You find that, you know, Allah uses such a loving way of saying to a human being that modesty is good for you. You know, it's not said in a way, and I think this is where, as religious people, and I'm not really sure I believe in that term, but people who want to practice religion, we have to question how we're propagating this idea of rightful hijab, because the way Allah speaks about it is in a way that defines it as a spiritual unity between the genders. It's something where there's a huge interaction between the physical form of wearing the hijab, whether a girl's, in this society or in Iraq, there's this openness in regards to how someone chooses to wear it.
Even in Christianity and Judaism, they do have religious law, towards segregation and also women covering up.
Without a doubt, Judaism, it's looked at to be not taboo, but it's looked down upon if you were ever to leave your house without a covering on your hair. As in their scriptures. It's dishonoring that you would leave your house without a cover or a veil on your hair. Christianity is likewise. It says if you were to ever to go and pray in a church or be in public without a headscarf or a veil to cover your hair, it's dishonoring your head, and you might as well shave your hair off. And you'll find now, even nowadays, just saying that 2019, the perspectives of Christianity being religious, you go to the nuns. They're all wearing fully covered. And that is looked up towards to be an aspect where people are religious.
As long as she learns to have a relationship with Allah, know that what Allah is telling her is for her benefit, for her growth, realize that there is a bigger picture there. It's not about this world. This isn't all there is. And sort of understanding the hijab, loving the hijab, having the role models that that we talked about, that portray what hijab should be, realizing that the hijab doesn't stop you from having a voice, doesn't stop you from having fun.
Women are commonly seen as flag bearers of Islam. They are constantly associated with Islam when seen on the streets because of their hijab. The hijab empowers women and gives them a sense of security and safety. Hijab should not be a factor that stops girls from achieving their goals and fulfilling their dreams. It should be a part of them and a part of who they are.